Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here for another mental health and wellness chat. I'm Brittany, and I'm one of your VC Counseling Center counselors, and I'm here with.
I am Miss Rachel Walker Wilkinson, and I am a psychology faculty member here at Victoria College. And I have been teaching psychology for about 11 years with VC.
So, yeah, and that's why you're the expert in the room for this topic today, ultimately. And I like this conversation because I feel like it can be good where we have the clinical perspective and then we have obviously all of your experience in teaching and being faculty for psychology. So, I think this could be a really interesting mix of the two things. And I really wanted to bring up this topic because I feel like this is something that students don't directly request, but I feel like it's predictable every semester. We get to the end of the term and it's complete panic across the board for
And
everyone.
sicknesses.
Exactly. Yes. Because, and the stress builds up, and we'll get to that. Stress builds up, starts causing
Correct.
sickness, and it's absolute chaos. So I wanted to have this for you guys to listen to as we get close to this time beforehand. We're definitely releasing this a little bit beforehand so that hopefully this can help ease that transition in finals week. So first question first. What are your experiences as a professor at finals and high stress times? I feel like so often obviously as students, we know the student perspective, but rarely do students ever get to hear the professor perspective of this time.
So my perspective, I can kind of compartmentalize and look at it different ways. One of the things that I've always tried to do as an instructor is to remember what it was like to be a student.
Yeah.
So, with my teaching philosophy, the way I kind of present everything to students is from the get-go. When we take exams at the very beginning of the semester, I talk about it being your opportunity to excel, the opportunity to show what you've learned throughout the semester, learned throughout the units that you've been studying, apply the information that you've been taught. So, from an instructor perspective on finals, I feel like the final exam is the time to show I did my work. I earned these credits. I have learned this knowledge, and it is my opportunity to excel and feel that my financial investment has paid off with my education. But like I said, I also remember being a student. And so everything piles on. It all comes down to this last week when everyone is giving the exams, everyone being all the faculty, all the courses that you're getting these exams all at one time, whereas maybe throughout the previous weeks, everything had been spaced differently. And so that can be very stressful. And of course, we're at a community college, right? So sometimes faculty may forget that students aren't just students here. We do have a very diverse set of student cohort. And so we have to remember that these students entering into final exams also have work schedules, also have children, also have other family duties. And so from a student perspective, I try to remember that as well. I try to know that they don't just have my exam to focus on, and they have a lot of things to manage. And so we'll get into this as we continue this conversation on some strategies that I like to offer students on how they can reduce some of the stress, some of the chaos during finals week. But I see the panic. I remind them to get their sleep. I remind them that students typically will come in so sick during final exams, and that's the last thing you want is to be ill. But there are some things that you can do to try to maintain your wellness, both physical and mental, while you're working towards that final exam week. So those are just kind of some things that I think about both on faculty perspective and then student perspective as well.
Well, and on top of that note, what do you feel like are some of the biggest barriers that you see to students doing well on final exams? Let's say a student has done well for the whole semester and they have the knowledge and you know that they can do this, but what do you see as some of the biggest barriers for them?
When it comes down to the final exam, I feel that some of them really struggle with that final bit of time management. Like I had said, a lot of things are spaced out throughout the semester. They can kind of prep and plan. And unfortunately, the way our academic schedules run, especially for fall, we go into that fall break and we come back in 2 weeks and bam, you hit the wall of finals. And so I think, even for the best students that are, studying and doing well on every single exam, when those finals come around and it's all at once, I can see that pressure, that being overwhelmed and how am I going to get all of this done? And you know as well as I, what's the first thing to go?
Yeah.
Sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the pitfalls of final exam weeks, which again, we'll get into that. Some
No,
strategies.
absolutely. And I think that's such an insightful perspective too, because I think in my experience, even that, I feel like that is it for a lot of people, that it is time management at the end of the day. You have anywhere from 2 to 5 exams that you're trying to cram as much information as possible. They're one after the other, even sometimes same day we have to schedule. And it's normal and it's human to get overwhelmed and panicky at just the thought of that, much less the exam itself. So so what exactly happens physiologically, psychologically, when we get into exam stress and when we start thinking about exams? Let's take a minute to kind of reflect on this. And for you guys too listening, let's take a minute and take a step back and look at analyzing what exactly is going on, right? So first of all, stress, this perception that I can't manage what I'm going through. This starts from an appraisal or a perception of the exam. So if I look at an exam and I say, oh, this is going to be easy, I'm obviously not going to stress about it because I've decided and I have perceived this exam as no big deal. So this is one place to start, is looking at the way that we're perceiving our exams and what we're telling ourselves about not only the exam itself and how hard it's going to be, but also our ability to manage and regulate that thing, you know?
Oh, yeah, perfect. The appraisal is something that is so interesting. And I feel like a lot of students get really caught up in comparing themselves to others, right? I mean, we see it in social media with TikTok, with following people. When you're looking into other people's lives, you're immediately comparing yourself to them. So you think student classroom, well, why am I stressed and that student isn't? How is that student, saying they're fine and they're going to do fine, but I'm over here not sleeping, not eating, stressing out. And so one of the things that is important to understand is that everyone's perception of stress can be different. It all falls back to that cognitive appraisal, right? What resources have I developed throughout my life in order to deal with these different levels of stress, this emotion that we experience through our unique, independent, individualized perception? And so when you look at it within yourself, I feel like it can offer you very individualized clarity. Maybe when you're comparing yourself, you might be looking at a student who still lives at home, who doesn't have to work, whose family supports them going to college, both, time wise, financially, emotionally, all of it. And so, yeah, they're not going to be stressed. They're going to have all of those markers, but this is reality and that's not everyone's world, right? So for those people that are comparing themselves, you have to look at that may be them over there in that compartment and how they handle stress and they have that resilience and support. But how am I going to do it? What coping skills have I developed? How am I dealing with this stress? Am I shutting down? Am I losing sleep? Am I, sacrificing my own health with nutrition or exercise? And so once you start looking, like you said, individually, how you perceive the stress and what you're doing with the stress, I think that's the first step in how you can turn it around and start making it better for yourself.
Well, and I like that question that you said too about kind of almost, do I have the resources to handle the stress at the time? And even if I feel like I don't, maybe where can I obtain more information about resources, or what could I do in this moment? And we see this so much in counseling. We always get a huge uptick around finals time of students that are at their wits end in complete panic mode, excuse me, coming in for collateral damage control, right? And while this is great and definitely do that, ultimately it's also important to think not only ahead of time, but also one of the biggest things that I always see is once we pass that stressor, obviously, and we get into post-finals time, even when students fail, they'll have that immediate rush of relief of, well, at least it's over. And I did all that I could do, right?
Yes.
But why can't we mobilize that perspective beforehand?
Yes.
Because it is exactly the same. I mean, yes, you should study and you should do everything in your power, but ultimately recognizing where those boundaries are, right? Of like, okay, if I do an all-nighter, what is the statistical probability that that's even going to make much of a difference? And also looking at, I can do everything I can do, but ultimately, the knowledge that I have at this point over the course of a semester is the knowledge that I have. And, things are just going to have to fall how they're going to fall at this point.
Right. Right. Yeah. You just kind of have to let it be what it will be. One of the things that I remember an instructor telling me back when I was in grad school was, yes, you have invested, 7 years
Mhm.
of your time into this education, going in for those exit exams, and you feel like it is make or break. And it kind of is at that point, whether
Yeah.
you're going to, earn that degree. But when we're talking about these courses, this is one of the things that I just valued so much. When we're talking about these finals, one of the things that I value so much that I was given was it's not the end of life.
Yeah.
And if you don't do well, then what? You retake the class.
Mhm.
It's not the end of the world. Or maybe you develop a different strategy going into your next semester and you do better. Maybe you realize your study habits just weren't on par, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You did your best at the time. And if you have that growth mindset and you continue to think of what you can do better, that is good enough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm with you. Let's think, into that what's done is done before we even get there. So we don't
Yeah.
allow for that physiological response to really tip us into where we won't do our best.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And looking to, even like you said, of, how can this be a growth moment for me versus defining me as a failure? Because
Yes,
those are two very different outcomes. And obviously,
absolutely.
like you said, one growth mindset, we're going to grow and develop from this challenge and experience, and decatastrophizing. Like, it's not the
Mhm,
end of the world. Even I have failed 2 classes. I failed 2 classes in undergrad. Is
mhm,
not the end of the world.
mhm,
You retake them
mhm,
and it replaces the grade on your F, and it brings
mhm,
your GPA is unaffected,
mhm, mhm.
essentially. So yeah, good, all amazing things to remember.
My math class, I made a D and
Hmm.
I cried. I was so happy.
You were happy?
I was so happy because I just thought I was never going to pass math. Math was one of the most difficult subjects that
Yeah,
I encountered in college. And whenever I earned my D, that was the one D on my transcript. And I knew that it was going to be okay. It,
yeah,
it wasn't going to fail me out of college, it wasn't going to keep me from going to grad school, and it was going to be okay. And
yeah.
so I found happiness in that it was still a box I got to check, no matter
Hmm.
the struggle, no matter the failure, because I absolutely did not do well in that class, but I still was able to move on.
Yeah,
Right. And so you're so right. The catastrophizing it, you don't need to think of it as being just shattering and things crumbling around you. It's just a test.
yeah. And I like that you mentioned that too, because I mean, you guys heard it here first. You can make a D in a class and still be successful and still reach your goals and still
Yeah.
do the things that you
Yeah.
want to do. Because I feel like so often we get hung up on that
Mhm.
that is the end of the world when it's
Mhm.
absolutely not.
Mhm. I will sidestep this though, and do say that um, check with your academic advisor just to be clear on this, on what
Hmm.
classes you can earn D's in, because
Yeah,
for credit courses that go towards your degree program, that's a little different. But for a psych major, college algebra was not something
yeah.
required. So woohoo for the D.
Exactly. So when we do know, whenever we have, like we talked about earlier, when we enter a situation where our body starts getting a stress response, like finals time, we enter into that fight, flight, or freeze, right? Those of you who've
Mhm.
taken psychology, you should remember this. And body starts dumping cortisol and adrenaline, which we know that obviously we have a psychological impact of stress, right? But because these chemicals are coursing through our body, it also causes effects that are outside of our control. Like, for example, when I am peak cortisol and adrenaline, it is harder to remember and recall information. So, when I'm in that state, it's going to be really challenging to take an exam that requires me to remember information and then regurgitate it in that exam, right? It's also going to impact concentration. So it's going to be harder to concentrate when I'm in this state. And it's going to be harder to make decisions when we're in this state. So it's like the frontal part of your brain that helps us make good decisions and access that information, it almost kind of gets shut off to a degree. And so it gets hard to even, this is why I hear so often from students, they'll say, I know all of this information, I do really well on all of everything related to this class, but then I get in that exam and it's like a light switch just turned off and I can't remember or do anything. And it's like, I've never taken this topic in my
Mhm.
life. And this is exactly why, because it's a physical response that your body is going through.
Yeah, there's actually a principle, the encoding specificity principle. So, what it tells us, and just in a nutshell here for time purposes, is basically that if you try to recall information in a different state of mind that you learned it, guess what? You won't recall it. And
Mhm.
so, that's something that can make it very difficult. If we're learning calm and we try to recall stressed, that recall is not going to be successful. Okay, so yeah, the encoding specificity principle is something that we should all be aware of. It's something that can be applicable in our personal lives as well. If you think about memories that you have, and this is something I actually teach on in my psychology course, in my general psych course, we can relate it to when you're upset with a significant other. All of a sudden, all the memories come flooding back to you with everything they have ever done wrong. You may go back in 1995, right?
That mixtape, right?
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so you remember all of it. And so that's where you see that related state of mind, that specificity, that encoding, where you were at when you encoded it, where you're at when you're recalling it. It is linear. So here with a test, this is something that, anybody that struggles with testing anxiety and especially that stress at final exams, you have to remember that while you're in class and you're raising your hand and answering those questions, and you're at home and you're studying and you're flashcarding yourself and you know that information, you're calm, you're enjoying it, you're making the information applicable, and you're answering those questions. So when you walk into that classroom, you've got to be in that same state of mind. You can't walk in thinking this is make or break. I'm going to fail. Did I prepare enough? You can't do that because you weren't doing that whenever you were studying. You have to have that same state of mind. So, of course, we can teach strategies like certain breathing techniques. One of my favorite breathing techniques is box breathing.
Yeah.
So, of course, if y'all are listening to this or want to look this up later, box breathing is really good, where you will take a breath and hold for 4 seconds. You will let out a breath and hold for 4 seconds. Take in a breath and hold for 4 seconds. And so you kind of do this box where you're in and out and in and out. And so you're holding this 4 second in a square fashion, and you get the physiological response from it. So that's one of the things that's important to understand with that stress during the final exam when you're sitting in that chair, is that you have to get your body to respond first. And once you can calm that physiological response, you can tell that adrenaline, no, no, don't need you right now. Stop firing. You can bring in that parasympathetic system to calm you, to conserve your energy. All of a sudden the mind will follow and the clarity will come, and you'll be able to sail smooth through that
Yeah.
final exam.
And that's a strategy we like to use in therapy too, because a lot of times there's some people that arguing with thoughts, replacing thoughts is very beneficial and that's exactly what they need. But sometimes those thoughts are so persistent no matter what we do. And I always have people come and they say, I've done all the therapy things. I keep telling myself the opposite of what I'm thinking, but I just can't make the thought go away. It's so intrusive, right? And sometimes, like you said, working backwards can be a good place to start of, okay, if I am in a calm body, I cannot have a panicked mind.
Correct.
So let's focus on the calm body because sometimes that's more realistic. And then we can calm our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to comment too. I see a lot of times with students, we almost kind of see the opposite of that, where there's not so much of panic, where it's more procrastination. So we get stressed out, we get overwhelmed, we see this exam and we say, I doubt my abilities, and we immediately enter avoiding mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we procrastinate studying, we procrastinate completing exams. And a lot of times we tell ourselves valid excuses like, oh my gosh, I have to focus on the kids right now, or I have to focus on this other thing going on in my life. I don't have time to worry about exams. I'll worry about it next week.
Mm-hmm.
And then before we know it, it's already time to go in and take the exam and we haven't done much of anything. So then maybe we pull an all-nighter, we don't sleep all night. And you can kind of see how we're setting ourselves up for failure by procrastinating. So the thing about procrastination is that it kind of creates this feedback loop where the more we procrastinate, the more stressed we get, the more stressed we get, the more we procrastinate. And it's just avoidance coping, right?
And then nothing gets accomplished.
Exactly.
And then the guilt sets in.
Yes, we're binging Netflix instead of studying like we're supposed to. And then, the thing is avoidance and procrastination, it gives us this temporary short-term relief. But ultimately, long term, it definitely increases anxiety and panic and stress for exam time. So it's something to be aware of, being real with ourselves and saying like, okay, am I procrastinating and avoiding right now? And if the answer is yes, that's okay.
Yeah.
It happens to the best of us. I still procrastinate and avoid things at times, but we just want to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, so I'll allow myself, 30 more minutes of procrastinating, but then we're going to study for an hour when we're done with that,
Right. Yeah. Find that balance, right? Okay. I'm going to, take a minute to go to the kitchen and find me some snacks and a drink, and then I'm going to get back to it. And what I like to use as a study strategy and did use in college was I'm going to get back to it and I'm going to get this far.
Yeah.
Instead of the inevitable, I'm just going to cram all night, you take your break, you do what you need to kind of refocus, calm yourself, get those shoulders to lower a little bit and those knots in your shoulders to kind of decompress. And then you get back to it and give yourself an end goal. And the end goal is not at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
You need to go to sleep. So, yeah, that's right on. One of the things that, is important to look at as well is us going back to what we talked about in the beginning with those coping strategies, right?
Yeah.
How do we fix it? How do we fix it if we've never been taught? We've never watched. Maybe, all of our exposures, the whole I'm psych, nature versus nurture, right? Those observational things that we have learned and have become so embedded in us. What if we don't know how to cope with stress? And so our go-to is that emotion coping.
Yeah.
When an emotion coping is, turning to the Netflix, turning to, prioritizing a little bit different than what might lead you towards success within the classroom. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I like to talk to students about is when you can, which it's not always, but when you can, problem focused cope, it really can shift things for you. So, if you're used to that emotion focused coping, you're stressed out, I'm going to watch my show and I'm going to laugh, at the Netflix series that I'm binging right now, and that's going to feel good. And in that moment, it gives you that release. But when you're done watching, what's still there?
Yeah.
The exam, the stress. So, how do we combat that problem? How do we overcome that? So, what we know with the mind and the body and stress, right? How we perceive stress and how we deal with it is that there is research that has shown us that the number one thing that will cause us anxiety in a stress state, one of the number one things is exams, the pressures of exams. The other one is relationship disagreements, those relationships that may falter on us from time to time. But focusing on those exams and how that can really create problems for us. If you are someone that struggles with that, it's important to kind of break that down. One of the other things that we know psychologically is when we perceive a lack of control, whether you are a self declared control freak or not, but when we perceive that lack of control of a situation, oftentimes that is what will elevate our stress levels, elevate our anxiety, elevate the tendency to want to go to that emotion focused coping. So, again, I go back to how do we problem focus then? Well, when we can create a sense of control, that is where we can start to reduce some of that stress.
Yeah.
But how do you control exams? You can't ask the instructor, hey, don't give us this final. We know we can't take control in that way.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that we can kind of create pseudo control, and what I often work with my students on is creating a schedule. Structure yourself, find that routine. And again, our students are so diverse in their backgrounds, with the different challenges they may be facing, work, jobs, family, all of that we had mentioned before. This is one of the things that I think is so useful because if you can create a schedule, if you can create that timeline of where you're going to be, when you're going to be doing it, and I mean, even waking up, getting dressed. How long is it going to take you to feed the kids and get them to school and you get yourself to campus?
Yeah.
Every minute, every 30-minute, 15-minute increment, where are you going to be and what are you going to be doing? It will give you a sense of control of your day.
Yeah.
And then whenever you put in those little study times, oh, well, I have an hour in between my classes and I usually, walk and talk or scroll through TikTok. But I know that final exam week, I'm going to have XYZ plugged into this schedule. Well, I need to take that hour and gain control of it and study. And so again, we can create this pseudo sense of a control over these final exams. And when you have that schedule, you will be shocked at the physiological response you get and how you feel less stress in that week.
No, and I love that. And I think that's a very well thought out, fleshed out, and down to earth
Mhm.
place to start here ultimately, because it takes 20 minutes to just sit down and go through a schedule. And I mean, that's even the next point too, is quick practical tips that we could use to calm down, which taking a sense of control back in that way is a really great place to start. Same thing with the box breathing, and really focusing on calming our physical body. So that can look like box breathing. We can do ground guided meditation exercises. Even here on the channel, we have our 10-minute reset. You can turn that on, listen to it, or you can even guide yourself through one and just kind of deep breathe and
maybe listen to those in between your finals.
Exactly. Mindfulness exercises, just being present. So really focusing, shifting the focus from panic about the exam to how can I regulate and make sure that my brain is completely online and totally engaged with this exam to give myself the best opportunity to actually show what I know and what I've learned.
Absolutely. To apply it and to do well at your opportunity to excel.
Exactly. Okay, so before we wrap up, any other thoughts, tidbits, nuggets that you want to make sure that
so much
students take from this message? Because I feel like we could do so many episodes on this.
I guess, one of the things is just to give yourself grace.
Yeah.
A lot of students will come in, very gung ho at the middle of the semester. Reality sets in of the struggles of life and school, and they may in the moment feel like they can't do it. But I feel like sometimes in those moments when you find your grit and you do succeed, it can be something that you just need. You need to prove it to yourself. So I'm all about that resilience and that determination. And, college is hard. And if it wasn't hard, everybody would do it, right?
Exactly.
So you've got to give yourself grace when you hit those speed bumps, when you hit those obstacles, when you realize you're feeling a little stressed and this is not normal for you, especially for our first time in college students, fresh out of high school students. It's just different. So maybe the first final exam week you encounter, you flop, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Give yourself grace, reevaluate, look at what you did wrong, make a schedule for the next semester, and you'll overcome it. Just don't give up on yourself.
Exactly. And I see that a lot too. We can be so hard on ourselves I hear that a lot. This is my second semester in college. I should have it figured out by now. When in reality, no. Like this is just your first semester in college. And even so, I mean, this is the first time you're taking that class. This is the first time you're taking that professor. And that's the thing about college is every class is so different. Every professor is so different. Every exam. Yes. Like there's no way. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what matters is that you do the best that you can do with what you have in that moment. And sometimes, even if that results in a less than ideal letter grade, it doesn't say anything about your worth ultimately. And I think that's the important thing.
Right. And that's too, just going back to when you find that grit within, you know what, maybe you wanted to drop, but you didn't. And maybe you didn't get that A, but maybe you got the C, and that's a pat on the back because you didn't drop and you saw it through.
Exactly.
So hang in there, guys. Y'all are going to do well.
Thank you so much for joining us today in your go-to space for honest conversations about mental health and well-being. I'm your host, Brittany, and
I'm Rachel Walker Wilkinson, your VC psychology instructor.
And we are so glad that you spent part of your day with us. And we really hope that you were able to get something out of this for your finals week. I hope to release this early enough that you have plenty of time to kind of let this soak in and lead you into finals week. So definitely utilize it. And remember, taking care of your mind is just as important as taking care of your body. Be kind to yourself, reach out if you need support, and know that you're never alone. Until next time, take care and take a deep breath.